Everybody, welcome. Joe here with you with a little bit kind of a different program today. What we're here to do is to examine what functions you might want to have easy access to and program them into your camera. When you do this, you can customize the camera so that it works better for you. In essence, and what I recently wrote about in the Photo Friday newsletter was make a date with your camera. And I've got my two camera bodies here. I've got my OM1, I've got my OM5. And the reason I brought them both out is because while they're very similar in their functions, there's a heck of a lot more buttons on the OM1 than there is on the OM5. So there's a lot of customization options. So let's take a look and see what we can do to make the camera work better for you, faster and more intuitive. So one of the things I like to customize in my cameras is to have a starting point. I'm sure you've all done this. You were out shooting last night and it was real dark and you're at 3200 ISO and maybe you're shooting at a 20th of a second and at 2.8 or f4. And then you come out the next morning, it's a brightened sun, you look through your camera and it's pure white. And something really cool is going on and you end up missing the shot. Now, I try to be a little better with my cameras. I have a default set of settings that I like to set it for. So what I will do is program that to one of the custom functions. Now, every camera is different in where and how you customize it. Some really want you to do it. Some, it's very optional. These cameras, as with any modern camera, have gotten crazy with the amount of things they did. I sat down with these two cameras for a couple of days just last week and went through all the menus and all the buttons, and actually I was overwhelmed by all the things it can do. Now, do they all apply to me? No, not for my type of photography. I'm primarily a landscape photographer now. I used to do a lot of portrait work, but I'm not into moving things. I don't do sports. I don't do anything that's really kind of moving fast typically. Now, if there's an alien landing, I want to be ready for it. And cameras have gotten very specific with what they can do. For example, on my OM1 here, I can program it not just to track a face or eyes. I can tell it which side of the face to track. I can tell it if it's going to follow an airplane or a helicopter or a train or a cat or a dog. It's gotten crazy. I'm kind of old-fashioned that way. I will just focus and take my shot. But there are a lot of things that you can do. So for example, one of the first things that I do with my camera is I pick my starting settings. And my default settings are manual. So I'll go to manual on my mode dial. I'll set my shutter speed. Typically, 1/160th of a second is a good starting point. And for my aperture, I'll choose f11. Now my ISO, I set for 400 as my default. I don't do much auto ISO stuff. So I've now just set all those things in the camera. And all I have to do is go into my menu system. And right on the first menu on this particular camera, there's a custom mode. And it shows you the 4 buttons. I have C1 through C4 on here. I just choose C1 and click on set. And it's done. So now wherever I leave my camera the night before, if I just spin the dial to C1, all of those settings, the aperture, the shutter speed, the ISO, are all there waiting for me. So I don't have to worry. I can, of course, adjust it after the fact. I'm in manual mode, so I have full control over the camera. But it's just a way to get your camera to a starting point where it's going to be ready to shoot right away. Now, many cameras offer custom shooting modes. As I mentioned, the OM1 has C1 through C4, and I would consider assigning certain functions to those modes, and I'll get more into that later. Now, on the on the OM5, I've just got one C button, one customization button, and again, what I would do with that particular button here is I will assign those same defaults so that when I pick up the camera, it is always ready to start shooting. Now, something else that many cameras have is something they call either a My menu or a Quick menu. And what this is a screen on your camera that you can then pick any of your functions, push a button, and it assigns that function to that screen. So maybe you want focus and ISO and your timer and whatever. It will all show up in that screen. However, if you're in a rush, you still have to go to the screen and then choose that particular function. One of the beauties of assigning a button is when you get used to having a button assigned to a function, let's say, for example, I wanted to change, I don't know, I want to change the AEL, the automatic exposure lock, to do something differently. Let's say, for example, that's where I want my 2-second timer to be, so that when I'm on a tripod and I need to run in the shot, or it's a slow shutter speed and I want to not touch the camera, I can just hit that button and automatically it's in 2-second timer mode, just as an example. But whatever is important to you, you can program to these buttons. Now again, depending on the type of photography you're doing, you might find that having a button assigned to the focus area or mode is very handy. If you like to switch between single point, multi-point, or continuous autofocus, that's something that really usually means going down into the menus. So if that's going to be something you can do, you can assign a button to that will bring up those choices right away, and again allow you to switch back and forth without going searching for it. Some people like to have quick access to metering modes, especially in challenging lighting conditions. For me, for example, as a landscape photographer, when I have partly cloudy skies and I'm playing hide and seek with the sun going behind clouds and in front of clouds, I might want to change my metering. If there's a particular thing I need to have metered correctly, I might switch between evaluative, matrix, spot, or center weighted metering so that it's going to give me the shot that I want. And again, that's a very handy thing to have when you're in lighting conditions that are constantly changing. Now, one other thing that's very personal is AFON, and my camera has a button right here called AFON. What does AFON mean? Another word for it is back button focus. A lot of people really like back button focus. What back button focus does is it separates focusing from the shutter button. Now, again, I'm kind of old-fashioned that way. I spent my entire career pressing a shutter halfway in order to get the thing in focus and locked there. So using another button usually throws me off. I know some people are a fan, not personally, but it is very popular. So if you set your AFON button, if your camera has one, it allows you to focus and then just press the shutter when the time comes. Again, a personal preference, but it's very handy. Often that is a button on most mid and high-end cameras. It has an AFON button, so that back button focus is a standard thing to just set right on the camera. Now, another thing you might want to change is your ISO. And again, what ISO does is it basically increases the volume or the gain of your sensor. So increasing the ISO is going to make the sensor more sensitive to light or need less light to get your exposure. The higher the ISO, the more noise you get, but it's much better to capture the shot than to worry about having a little bit of noise. Now, the vast majority of cameras have some kind of ISO button, or for example, on Fujifilm cameras, a lot of the X series has it on the dial, which is very old school. But for example, my camera has an ISO button, so I don't need to program one. It defaults to that. But if you don't have an ISO button, it can be handy, because just going from, say, for example, 400 to 800, that's one stop of sensitivity increased. What that means is, let's say, for example, you've decided you really can't go below f4, but your camera wants to go lower and you only have an f4 lens. Well, bringing the ISO up from 400 to 800 will double the amount of sensitivity of the sensor, and that will often just get you to the exposure, the shutter speed, and the ISO that you need to make that picture happen. There's a lot more to cover. I'll be back again soon with more considerations for customizing your camera. Until next time, make a date with your camera and get to know each other better. I promise you it will be time well spent. Thanks for joining me. See you again soon. Bye-bye.